de Kooning is a rather interesting character. He's going to get a fairly late start, very similar to Pollock, where it's closer to the end of his life where he really gets a start in the arts. He's not known for the arts in his 20s and 30s. It's really as he moves into his 40s. And he follows Pollock's lead, although Pollock was initially disliked by the public. De Kooning doesn't seem to really care, and he's going to create these pieces of gestural expressionism. Now, an abstract expressionism. Now, when he does, there's going to be a difference. He tends to use a lot of human forms. He's kind of mixing post-war expressionism and abstract expressionism and tying the two together in this very unique form that we only really see from de Kooning, and it's very loosely that we're placing him in gestural abstraction, in this idea of, or under the umbrella of, abstract expressionism. So let's look at his painting Woman I. And of course, I'm referring to the painting here, not the person looking at it. Moving ahead, Woman I is actually part of a series, and he's going to do a number of these paintings of women. And at first glance, they seem grotesque, they seem distorted and disturbing, and, well, arguably that's part of the point, but we'll get there. Now, what we're seeing is something rooted in figural painting, but still depicting the sweeping strokes and energetic application of color that's going to be so typical of gestural abstraction. What we have is this ferocious-looking woman based in part by an ad for Camel cigarettes. So what he's doing is he's kind of tearing apart the image of a woman and using the best possible smile and the best right eye and the best left eye. You remember doing that sometime in grade school or high school. Make a person out of a collage from magazines. And it always looks disturbing. It never looks as beautiful as it really should. And yet, that's exactly what he's doing. In fact, he's going to be calling our attention to a couple of things, but we'll get to that. Now, the piece also seems to suggest the ideas of a fertility figure, like the Venus figurines, or in this case, the Venus of Willendorf. And when you look at the bodily proportions, it kind of makes sense. The legs seem very small, like we see in the Venus of Willendorf, especially as we move to the feet. The body seems accentuated, especially the breasts, the belly, the hips. The arms are arguably almost non-existent, and that face is almost a minor element of the painting, even though we kind of want to go there. We want to focus on it. Now, when we look at the painting overall, it's all about the process. The process was particularly important to him. This painting took him 2 years. He would paint the woman and then scrape it away before starting anew the next day. And he would do this over 200 times, which gives us some of that very spontaneous feel that we get from the painting. It feels like he sat down and just created it. In reality, nothing of the sort was actually happening. In fact, he was so energetic that at times he punches holes in his canvas due to overly energetic application of color. Now, I also want to compare this to the Venus de Milo. Kind of an odd comparison, right? The Venus de Milo is seen as this great idealization of women, and de Kooning's Woman I arguably being the absolute opposite. But is it? I mean, what is de Kooning really getting at? Well, he's arguably getting at the artificiality of the image of women in advertising. Remember, he's looking at those Camel cigarette ads. He's looking at pop culture for his source material. And so he's creating this artificial form. There's always this difference between sort of the Frankenstein artificial, I'm going to create the perfect nose and the perfect eyes, and the idea of idealizing, which is what we would see in the Venus de Milo, where the proportions are the focus, not the individual elements. And so de Kooning is taking those cubist ideas of analyzing individual elements, putting them together, creating this collage-like form with a great deal of energy and spontaneity to create something very unique, and yet trying to get the same idealization as we see in the Venus de Milo, just coming out with a very opposing final product. So the other issue that comes up when we deal with Woman by de Kooning is these ideas of sexism, these criticisms that he's somehow degrading women, and he would argue that in fact he is not. In fact, he's arguing in their favor, that everything that we surround women with is about objectification. So women have to have the right makeup so that they look right to men. They have to have the right clothes so that they look right to men. De Kooning is arguing that his painting is, in fact, taking that and turning it on its head, making people aware of this objectification of women through the artificial application of various forms, such as makeup, etc., that we see through magazines, that we see today through Photoshop or Instagram. De Kooning would love those ideas. And he's presenting it in this grotesque form that harkens back to the ideals of the Greek female nude, but also harkening back to those Venus figurines, those fertility symbols that we see going back to the Paleolithic. And so he's not creating something completely new. This is not something springing forth solely from his own mind. It is something that has built on the shoulders of giants before him. And what he's doing is remixing those ideas, applying the ideas of abstraction from the 20th century, and coming out with Woman I.